Thank you for joining me on Talking Sonics. A few weeks ago I spoke to Australia's most successful guitarist, songwriter, publisher and music producer, Michael Flanders. Now, he started as a slide guitarist, but he's gone on to live in Nashville, Tennessee, producing multi-platinum records for some of the hottest new artists on the planet. Well, in the country world planet, that is. And God, these are great releases and, you know, really some exciting stuff. But most surprising of all, upon speaking to Michael, I learned that he's a lovely, down-to-earth guy, explaining his journey from starting as a young, mean and green slide player to dominating the country scene in America. This is what he had to say. Check it out. Michael, thank you for joining me on Talking Sonics. How are you this morning?
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure, pleasure. So, you know, I was saying that just thinking about you and that you're, you know, one of Australia's probably most accomplished slide musicians, and you have a great music history. You're a producer, songwriter, player, now living in the USA, but from Queensland, I believe. Is that right?
Brisbane, sunny Brisbane, Queensland.
Sunny Brisbane. Tell me about your music background. Is it a family-based thing? Where did it all start for you?
It did. My dad was a country guitar player, and he liked all the old Aussie country stuff, you know, which, funny enough, my dad loved it. My mum hated it, you know. But they bought me a guitar when I was 9 years of age. It was a Christmas gift. Little tiny half-size K-Poc acoustic, you know, and that's where it started. You know, I'd jam with Dad and learn country tunes and blah blah blah. And, you know, and like you, I mean, I ventured into rock as quick as I could. You know, I mean, I think the funniest thing is, you think that at one point I thought nothing else existed. I mean, the whole family, you know, Dad's record collection didn't go out. I think there was one Beatles record in there, you know, which I actually still have, the little vinyl, you know, hanging up on my studio wall, you know. But the funny thing is it wasn't really till my cousin on my mum's side moved into our house while his parents went back to England. And that was my massive brain explosion. I mean, he bought in this massive stereo and this massive record collection. And I was 15 by that point. I've been playing for a few years. But, you know, I think we overestimate playing for a few years. You know, how much do you really pick up your instrument, you know? So, you know, I wasn't some accomplished guitar player. You know, I practice every day now on steel guitar, you know, every day. But the funny thing was I was exposed. And I was exposed at 15, and some of those artists I still listen on my playlist today. Joni Mitchell, you know, and but Bob Seger, it was Night Moves that came on that blew my mind. To hear those acoustic guitars, you know, I was
big,
like,
big, lush, powerful, confident stuff.
Beautiful, beautiful, and
great production too.
It was all Muscle Shoals, man. I know
what a great studio. Great story.
Yeah, I know it all. I've spent a lot of time down there, and I even know Noel, who bought the building, and now I think the Beats guys own the building now. But I went down there first time 2007 in the middle of winter, freezing cold, but I got some stories there one day, you know. So, but anyway, that's
so your family. I mean, your father was a country musician.
Well, he was a country picker, you know. I would classify it more as a hillbilly picker, you know. You know, Reg Lindsay, Slim Dusty, that kind of hillbilly Australian country, you know.
Okay.
He loved that. You know?
So, but then what made you sort of lean towards slide guitar? And I think you were telling me that you're not just a pedal steel player. You started as a, you know, like a blues slide player, or?
No, well, again, probably in my 20s, I kind of figured out that, oh my God, when I listened to those Richard Clapton records, I was playing those songs in a cover band and realized that it's not fingered guitar.
Yeah.
You know? And then I realized it was Kirk Larange, the Canadian slide guitar player. So Kirk Larange was the David Lindley to Jackson Browne as Kirk was the David Lindley to Richard Clapton. And so that was my first real, and then I went to another buddy of mine here in town, Mark Dozzy, and I said, you know, what's this, you know, you play a bit of this slide thing, you know. And he introduced me to Rycuda, and that was it, you know. And,
okay.
And you may see on my website, you know, me and Rycuda, I actually got to hang with Ry. And I didn't want to be a cheeseball, but I wasn't going to miss the opportunity of sitting down with Ry and saying, thank you. You know, everything You know, that I built upon was your foundation, you know.
I mean, I remember jamming with a friend at the age of 15 who was into blues, who introduced me to Rycuda, and I think for a lot of guitarists that have been around, you certainly, you know, you hear his sound, he's playing his style. It's such an icon. Yeah, thanks, well given. And just another point for those listening that don't know who Richard Clapton is, a contemporary, fantastic Australian singer-songwriter, guitar player. Massive hits here down under, a great talent as well, so I can understand that sort of interest. Yeah.
Go and listen to Deep Water and Capricorn Dancer and all those songs. So brilliant writer, and Kirk had a very unique style. His style was not like the style that I kind of started to gravitate towards in the beginning. Was more of that Allman Brothers kind of thing, you know, Duane Allman. And I got friendly with Kirk in my 20s, and he then opened me up to a guy in Tamworth called Laurie Minson, who's a brilliant musician, brilliant Australian musician, brilliant genius tech as well. He builds guitar pedals that I actually use, you know. His delay is the gecko, not the echo, you know. I have his distortion, the bush pig, you know. Laurie's an amazing lap steel player. He plays pedal as well. But he designed these truncated brass slides. And so I ordered, so Kirk put me onto Laurie. I called up Laurie, and I ordered 4 of these slides. Now, one of my engineer friends here in Brisbane, I used to work heavily with him. I gave him one, and I still have the other 3. He still has that one. So they've never lost, fallen off an amp and fallen away somewhere. So I still have those precious gems. And so I probably had them for like 35 years or something, you know.
So, yeah, I can understand that. I mean, musicians like to collect things, old pedals, things that almost come with them to give them good luck. It sounds like you've got a good luck piece with those slides. So tell me about the transition from, you know, what got you into country music and pedal steel, which is
I think the country music was there from the beginning, whether I liked it or not. I think that virus jumped into my system. And,
is it really that bad?
I thought it probably was when you were a kid, and you know, I remember hearing Bruce Springsteen and Born to Run and thinking, why am I playing these cowboy songs, you know? The funny thing is I took a full circle. Yeah. So I made a living as, you know, playing guitar in silly cover duos and bands for a few years. And I think I was always the kind of personality that there was more out there, you know, there's more there. And to my own demise, you know, you keep searching for that. And with that comes education, or you crumble, you know. So I started to get sessions because of the slide thing, because no one else was doing it. Kirk was in Sydney, so he wasn't competition to me in Brisbane. Yeah. He lives up in Tamborine Mountain here now. So that was a big eye opener. I started being recognised in town here in this, you know, this tiny fishbowl, which as you probably thought, I thought that was a big deal. You know, when I was in my 20s, you know, getting called to go and play on someone else's record, you know.
In town, are you talking about Gold Coast or Tamworth?
No, here in Brisbane.
In Brisbane, okay.
Yeah. So you know what I mean? Your mind is like, wow, I'm getting called to get paid to play on someone else's thing, you know?
Yeah.
You know, years later, I do hundreds of them, you know? But the funny thing is I really started learn about studio and people and producers and how to work with artists and how to stay present but not get in the way. And so that was a big learning curve in my 20s. And my girlfriend at the time, who now is my wife, we started writing lots of songs together. And then in 1992, we've still got to remember we're still playing rock at this point,
Right.
rock pop, you know.
Yeah.
And then we head across to the States, and we spend as long as we could on the visa waiver to learn what we could over there and meet. I went to Nashville, I went to Memphis, so I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. Went to the Musicians Institute of Technology and visited. Got a very good friend that looked after me there. Went to all their sessions and all their concerts, and thought I knew a bunch of stuff, which looking back now I know Jack didn't know a damn thing, and then I came back, and one of the agents that I worked with here, she gave me a job, so I started booking bands for a while, and it was kind of more of an extra income, which was kind of good, working in this agency for us. But that's when the song thing started. I started writing, and I don't know why,
So what was your first success in terms of songwriting?
My first success was a band called Aim for More. I wrote all of the songs on their project. I co-wrote some, but wrote most of them. And it was a funny story because their manager, they were all down in Sydney and getting signed all their paperwork to Warner Brothers. And then they find out that they didn't write any of the tunes. So I get this call from John Brommel. John's dead now, unfortunately, bless his heart. And John is like, who are you? We've got all this material. And I had a little studio, so I demoed them all myself,
Right.
I had, back then I had ADAT machines,
So that time John was head of publishing for Warner?
Head of Warner, head of Warner Chappell Music. Yeah. So he became, so anyway, long story short, he flew me down to Sydney and I didn't realise all of a sudden I was in a negotiation, which was my first real business negotiation. And
how did you do?
And I realised that what he wanted was of more value to him than me,
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny that by the time we had kind of negotiated a figure, he actually did say, I would have paid more, But we became very good friends, and I look back at that was my first real learning and my first introduction to understanding the business of music, and that's changed everything because I do know that I had unfortunately an entrepreneurial streak, and he guided me the best way he could to not make mistakes. But hence then I got I did a lot of joint venture deals with him, and I then went on to working in a major independent record label and working closely with him, and then working with BMG as a distribution label, and
was that in Australia or
in Australia? So these were things that all led up to my education,
right?
And during that period, my wife then had a pop deal, and then we went right down that road as doing pop, and that's kind of when I realized this pop stuff is making me sick. I realized that my body, I'd turn up to one of her gigs, dressed like a cowboy, and there's something wrong with this picture,
Yeah.
And I was very organic and very grainy in the style that I played. So I realized that there was something in my blood that was very much like a Texas red dirt guy.
Yeah.
And I swim there beautifully. And just note, this last week, I got 2 cuts on a massive country red dirt artist. 2
Right.
songs that I'd co-written. The guy's name is Creed Fisher. So look him up. There's millions of streams.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I got that call 2 days ago, that he wants to cut another tune. Voice is incredible.
And I guess the thing in comparison, you're talking about your wife recording pop and feeling a bit disconnected. The great country artists, I mean, the history of country music in certain circles is about soul and heart and feeling. And,
Totally.
you know, I kind of, in a way, I feel that Nashville is super pop now and become this sort of almost plastic polished pop machine, which is a little bit sad, but there's still, every now and then, there are gems coming out. And you know...
Well, the beauty is it's a town that the hats change all the time. You've got that, as we know now, we have 3 major record labels, but we have a lot of imprints and a lot of massive indies, and so what they're spoon feeding on the radio, you can breathe it in, and then as you exhale, you then can find all these incredible other artists that are, there's a Nashville songwriter, his name's John Randall, and Spotify just told me yesterday that he's my second favorite most listened artist. Songs are beautiful, and it's not mainstream Nashville, but he's obviously in the millions of streams, and he's having fun doing what he does, But yeah, so going back to the wife, so I realized at that point, it was a massive turning point. It was like, she looked at me, I looked at her, and she's like, I don't like this shit anymore. And I'm like, yeah, it's not suiting me, because they were taking her pop music and then doing remixes, and she started becoming successful as a dance artist, and that's not what she wanted. Yeah. She was a guitar player playing like Melissa Etheridge, and she knew she's an incredibly good songwriter. So she took a back seat. I dived heavily into country. I had a guy walk in the studio, and his name was Michael Byers, and so I cut it was his first full album, and that was it. I mean, it was called Somewhere in Between, which was somewhere in between rock and country.
Okay.
And that established me. I think I did 54 major release records in 5 years after that.
54 in 5 years.
They used to joke up here. They used to joke saying that 98.9 was Flanders FM. So and that's how I met Robert. And then Robert, had these big aspirations about publishing. And
so this is Robert McKay we're talking about, who also has had a big influence on me when I was a 16-year-old guitarist. I met him in a cafe, and they sort of I was a musician cafe. My guitar teacher would perform there, and I'd play some blues licks, and we'd jam, and they sort of kind of jumped onto the stage and just joined us one night. And it was kind of like a family party with my father and my mother, and everyone's kind of joined in, and kind of went from there. But he did some songwriting for me early on, which got me signed to EMI, which was really interesting. So great musician Robert is. So you started a publishing company with him, is that right?
Well, what happened is they were looking to kind of accelerate their career with him and Gary. Gary, as you may know, Gary Cole is a great Australian songwriter, has passed away recently. So they came to me as their act, and I produced multiple records with them. Started with the first one, I can't even remember what it's called. But then he kept, whining and dining me to kind of figure out how to really get into the business. And so I headed up I'd been going to the States 4 or 5 times a year anyway. Yeah. And so he was like, well, why don't you do that? And I do this, and see how we can meet in the middle. And that's what we did. And, unfortunately, many businesses, I mean, he went through, marriage breakups and divorces and partners. And so bleeding a lot of money, unfortunately. We ended up selling catalogs. And in some cases, we did pretty well. So that's kind of what happened. And I stayed on and learned a lot through those periods, obviously. And then also started brokering catalogs, producing more, writing more. And that was you know, that was the lifestyle. And you know, we head back now in like a week. You know,
Right, so you're in Brisbane at the moment?
Brisbane at the moment. Came back here for 12 months and don't want to mess with our green card, established green card situation.
So tell me a little bit about Nashville. Did you have a studio, formerly have a studio on Music Row?
Yep, I had a couple. So when
What,
we were
what you should
working,
explain also, what is the famous Nashville Music Row? What's it all about? What does it feel like? I mean, I'm an Aussie. I've never been there actually, so maybe others have, but
it's four streets that kind of started at some point. So Music Row is 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Avenue.
okay.
And I suppose back in the old country era, you know, in the 50s, it would have started where people started, you know, building a studio in an old home or a law office in an old home. And they just, because it was so convenient, they could walk to each other's places. And, you know, I used to pitch songs by just walking on the road, you
Wow.
know. It was a very different Nashville too in 2006, 2007. The credit crunch changed a lot.
Right.
But the camaraderie is what's so great about those streets. I obviously said these three streets so many times. My son's publishing company is called These Three Streets.
Right.
But I'm not joking. People like Garth Brooks would park in my parking area. You know, I mean, I saw everybody. And at times you would get a co-write by saying, "Oh, hi, I'm Mike," you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, and we would meet that way. We
So
would sit out
a
on the
really
floor.
friendly three streets.
Yes.
Sounds like
I could sit out on my front porch, which used to be Dolly and Porter's building. So it was Porter Wagner's fireside house that we rented.
Yeah.
So I had the whole house, and then his old studio was backed onto it. And so, you know, John Rich from Big and Rich rented it for a year, that studio. So John and I got very friendly. You know, he'd come in with his freaking new pistols and all kinds of craziness. And Alice
sounds like
Cooper,
Denny Crane.
yeah, John Legend, Zach Wilde. I mean, all kinds of folks I just see coming in and out, you know. It was a really exciting period on 18th Avenue. And then when things started to become very commercialized, the building got bought.
Yeah.
And they bulldozed and put apartments up. And then we moved to the area called Berry Hill, which is the secondary Music Row area. And I actually kind of luckily found a house that was really good, had been a studio at one point, and I just put my gear in and put some tie lines under the floor again because I could get in the basement, you know.
Yeah, right.
And boom, away we went, you know. I made a lot of records there during that period, a lot of records.
So are you now heading back to a studio that you own, or are you changing premises? Where are you heading back to Nashville or another part of the USA now?
Going back to Nashville, and I'm actually looking now at properties out in the woods.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to still be very, you know, proactive in the community, but have a piece of paradise. And I'm hoping to find a property that has two homes on or something where I can, you know, turn one into the studio and, you know, so.
Yeah, I always dream of those amazing big American barns in the hills, you know, that just acoustically beautiful and look aesthetically wonderful with their vintage timbers. That would be the dream. But yeah, I hope you find something really nice.
Who knows? I mean, we had a lake home, 3-story lake home for years, and I had the basement for the last few years as my studio and living for the other 2 floors. People could come around the side of the house. They didn't have to go through the house. And American homes are very insulated because of the weather, so it was perfect. I didn't often do it, but I could cut drums in there as well, and so yeah, it was fun.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Now, just quickly tell me, for people watching the channel here, what are a couple of the artists or tracks that you would recommend people look up that you remember producing and really enjoying the finished result of?
One of my favourite artists that's doing really well, he's throwing his record, the last record I did, in for a Grammy nomination. His name's Jeremy Parsons, and he lived in Nashville when I worked with him, but he's since moved back home to San Antonio, Texas. But Jeremy Parsons, both the last two records I did, and a really earthy, it's a very minimalistic record, not a lot of session musicians. Steve Brewster played drums, which, Dierks Bentley, Faith Hill, blah, blah, blah. Bob Seger goes on, credits through the roof. But it was him and literally my son, Caleb, and I pretty much played.
Your son's a great player as well. So
yeah, well, you're probably talking about Ben, though, the big boy.
Okay.
The little boy, Caleb,
Oh, okay.
Caleb's an absolute bomb as well.
So obviously in the genes, you're passing the genes on.
Yeah, Ben's off the chain at the guitar thing. I don't play like that at all. He's a whole different level to me. I put things on my fingers, but I played all the acoustic parts. I've some steel on the record, a lot of slide on the record.
Yeah.
So and Caleb played bass and engineered it with me, and he's producing now as well. So that's something I really love. There's another older record that I really admire that I worked on. It's called Rain on Fire, and the artist is Jill King. She's from Arab, Alabama, but oh god, it's got some more soul than a twisted sand shoe, Amazing record. I did some writing on that as well. I didn't write on Jeremy. There's another guy that's with Creed Fisher that we got to cut. There's a guy called Jared Hill that is one of the latter things I worked on that I admire. I did a lot of writing with him. Every song was a co-write. But one of the big records I worked on was Siobhan Magnus. It was a rock record, American Idol. That was big. And another big artist I worked on was Heidi Newfield, which, I Want to Love Like Johnny and June and all those big hits. She's a multi-platinum artist. We wrote a lot, recorded a lot, did film soundtrack stuff a lot. I did won a Best Song Award with Siobhan at a film.
I'm getting exhausted listening to the list. I think you need a holiday, mate. Hard worker.
Well, there's a little bit of stuff. A little bit. And since we've been in Australia, we cut the track with James Blundell and Lily Grace. So Caleb and I worked on that here. I don't know if it was a #1. I think it was the most added song to radio at one point. But we did that. We've done a few cool things here. There's another little girl that we worked with recently, Maddie Cale, that got added to all the major playlists the other day. So
cool.
It is
very cool.
Well, it is what
lots
it
of
is.
fun, lots of fun. Now, you've recently played some very beautiful slide on a song I've worked on called "All Right with Me" by Tasmanian-born country songwriter Bruce Holloway. Tell me about Bruce, and you were working with his tracks for the publishing company. I believe did you say there's hundreds of songs he'd written?
Oh yeah, it was one year. I think he handed in 101 songs. So Bruce was friendly with an engineer in Brisbane now called Jason Millhouse. Jason and I worked a lot together, and Jason's a wonderful engineer, wonderful mix engineer, and so he knew of Bruce from Tasmania. Bruce was obviously a big wheel down there, everyone watched Bruce play guitar, and Bruce had a heart the size of Ayers Rock, and I really didn't know them in Australia very much. They'd come into the studio a couple of times because Jason was helping them with some things, and so I knew of them, but I didn't have a relationship with them, and they moved to Nashville. They were friendly with Greg Shaw, which was, Keith Urban's original manager.
Yeah.
So Greg had helped them move over to the US.
Okay.
And Bruce was engaged to a BMI lady called Mary Loving. And one of the big radio CRS, it's called, radio weeks they have where they showcase artists in Nashville.
Yeah.
I was walking up the stairs because I was Warner's, I was walking up with the ex-head of Warner Chapel,
Tim
Tim Whipperman, and Tim and his woman, I was very, very friendly with, and they were coming down the stairs, and I'm like, "Oh, you're those Aussie guys," and so we exchanged phone numbers.
Yeah.
And then he invited me to some party at Mary's farm, and so that was the start of the relationship. And then I had got an office on the road. So this was very early in 2007.
Yeah.
They had started cutting some demos with Eddie Gore over there, which is a lovely bloke, and I listened to them, and there's some okay tunes there, but Bruce kind of really hit his stride a couple of years later.
Right.
He, you know, as you know, the craft of songwriting is not an easy taught education.
No.
It has multiple components that make up a great songwriter, and a lot of it, as you know, we are aware of, is pain. A lot of wonderful writers are tortured souls. You know, Dean Dillon. You know, go and research Dean Dillon, and you know, holy dooly, you know, that's the guy who wrote the Stapleton whiskey tune. You know, and Dean wrote that 30 years ago. You know, so there's a thing that started to happen to Bruce, and I saw the progression, and it was people, it was separation, and it was him establishing his head.
Yeah.
And people didn't know, but he was suffering depression.
Right.
Which I think also made him a better writer.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I mean, there's a
problems.
beautiful depth to his work. All Right to Me just really gravitated to me when you sent it over to me to listen to. I was just sort of kind of hit the floor, you know, and I think there's a simplicity there and a magic, and then a lot of songwriters say that the great ones are the ones that just sort of all come out in a constant stream or a continuous thought. And I guess, you've got to be in the right emotional place. But for Bruce, it sounds like he was in a pretty challenging place.
Yeah. And you identified a little diamond in the rough, you know, and there's a few of them. Yeah. There's a song he wrote called My Radio that I still pitch today, and for God, I wish I could get a cut on it, you know.
Better send it over to me.
It brings me to my knees every time I listen to it, Yeah, well, remind me, My Radio, it's called.
My Radio, okay, I will. So, tragically, we lost Bruce to a drunk driver, of all things, which is just pretty rotten. I identified the body, which was... Pitch is still there today, you know. But I mean, I wanted to talk about him because there's a legacy of work, a body of work, great songs. And so, you know, for friends and family, thank you, Bruce, you know, for being, you know, giving us your soul, basically. So, really nice, really nice.
Yeah, as we all, you know, gone too young, you know. Anyway, the guy who was extremely drunk, Bruce was turning into his driveway, and he came out on the shoulder of the road around the cars and picked him up, and you know,
Well, not a nice note to end on if I'm going to finish, but we've been having a nice chat. Thanks so much for joining me on Talking Sonics. I appreciate you being here. Safe travels back to the USA.
My pleasure, mate. Pleasure, and you're doing a beautiful job of Bruce's track, so I'll send you some more, and you can I really see what gumbo you can cook up there, eh?
I look forward to it. It's fantastic. Okay, well, safe travels. I hope you find that fantastic recording barn. Cheers, mate. Take care.
See you. Bye, mate.
What she thinks. Sometimes it offends. Sometimes she cares. Sometimes good and careless. She knows she's something, but plays it down. It's that sweet something that keeps me around. And it's alright, yes, she's alright. Alright, well, she's alright. Alright, she's alright with me.
What a great guy, and what a fantastic story. Now, if you're into country music, or even if you're not, I highly advise checking out some of those music releases that Michael mentioned. His production is fantastic. There's a lot to learn in listening to what he produces and creates. So yeah, great guy. Check it out. I really advise you check it out. So if you haven't done before, please subscribe to Talking Sonics and tap the little bell down below, which allows you to be notified of up and coming or new videos. So keep connected with us. Thank you again for joining me on Talking Sonics, and I hope to see you very soon.